My former fiancé betrayed me and told me I'd never find anyone worthy like her. A year later, I was dating an actress/model who had secretly liked me since our college days. A few days ago, while scrolling through a forum full of infuriating real-life stories, I stumbled upon a post about a guy whose girlfriend cheated on him and acted like it was no big deal. The shamelessness reminded me of my ex. Let's call her Isabel. I haven't told many people about this story, mostly because it's long and honestly, it was very upsetting at the time. But after reading that post, I thought, why not? Let's just tell it. This story happened about 2 years ago. I met Isabel through an exclusive dating app meant for serious relationships. I was 34, she was 31 back then. We connected instantly, bonding over indie films and a shared passion for street food. After a few weeks of chatting online, I asked her out. I have to admit I was quite nervous because Isabel had this movie star beauty. I'm not insecure, but she was definitely out of my league. At the time, I thought it wouldn't get serious because girls like her usually have plenty of options. I didn't want to get hurt. It sounds strange, but dating someone that beautiful comes with its own set of challenges. Still, our first date went really well. She was funnier, smarter, and more genuine than I had expected. Soon after, we officially became a couple. However, one thing always bothered me. Isabel got too much attention from other men. Even when we were out together, shameless guys would still approach and flirt with her. At first, I tried to brush it off. I trusted her. But then, during a friend's event, I caught Isabel staring at another man. The same way she used to look at me. That bothered me, but I kept quiet. I told myself I was overthinking. Then one night, while we were chatting about random stuff, she brought up the topic of a hall pass. If you don't know, a hall pass is a hypothetical situation where you and your partner each choose a celebrity you'd want to sleep with without getting blamed or questioned. It's just a silly game, but sometimes it reveals hidden thoughts. She was the one who brought up the topic, which surprised me because usually I was the one making silly jokes like that. She said her pick was Henry Cavill, which made sense, handsome and famous. But then she casually dropped a line that stunned me. I doubt many celebrities would turn me down, followed by a smug smirk. I knew Isabel was beautiful. That was never in question. But hearing her say it like that made me uncomfortable, as if she believed she could have anyone she wanted, and that really unsettled me. The image of the once approachable girl was slowly being replaced by a woman who was overly confident, almost arrogant. At the time, I didn't react, just gave a half-hearted laugh to move on. But that sentence kept replaying in my head for days. Time passed, and things seemed to go back to normal. But in reality, I had started noticing subtle changes in her. Isabel started coming home later. She used to be home by 6 p.m., but now it was 7, sometimes 8. She claimed work was getting busier, but her excuses felt shallow. One time, she told me she unexpectedly ran into an old friend and came home late. But when I asked who it was, she just mumbled and quickly changed the subject. In the past, Isabel would excitedly tell me everything, what she did, who she met, any funny stories. But now, those details gradually faded away. Worse, every time I gently asked why she was late, she would get irritated, even raising her voice, accusing me of being controlling. I didn't want to argue, especially when she was already so defensive. But the late nights continued, along with increasingly flimsy explanations. However, Isabel kept coming home late, with increasingly unconvincing excuses. A sense of unease crept in, like an alarm bell constantly ringing in my head. Something's not right here. I knew she was beautiful, always had. But the way she talked about being able to get anyone made me feel like I was dating a completely different person. Isabel used to be down to earth and approachable. But now, every smirk, every time she avoided eye contact, I felt the distance between us growing. I didn't want to believe the worst. I ignored my instincts, convincing myself it was just work stress. Everything went smoothly for a while after that passport conversation. But then I started to notice changes in her. At first, they were small, but over time they became more obvious. But then her late nights became more frequent. From 6 p.m., it turned into 8 p.m., sometimes even later. When I asked, Isabel would reply curtly, "I was busy," or "a friend needed help." Her words were so dismissive, it felt like she didn't even respect me anymore. However, the late nights kept happening, with increasingly blurry excuses. The doubts inside me began to grow. It was like a small voice whispering in my head, "Something's not right here." I tried to ignore it, but it became harder and harder. The conversations and denials. Finally, I confronted her. I asked directly, "What's going on, Isabel? You've changed." Of course she denied it. The usual excuses. "It's just work and I'm tired." But this time her eyes avoided mine in a way that was different. Days passed and nothing changed. My suspicion became unbearable. I had to know the truth. I thought about secretly checking her phone. But Isabel always kept it with her, even taking it into the bathroom. I knew if I wanted the truth, I needed a different approach, something undeniable. Fake explanations. After that conversation, things seemed to improve, at least on the surface. Isabel became more open, telling me about her reasons for being late. But I could clearly sense an awkwardness, an invisible gap between her words and the truth. There was something off in the way she spoke. Her voice was flat, lacking the usual spontaneity. She no longer looked me in the eyes but fixated on her phone or stared blankly into space. I vividly remember one night when she came home late and said she had randomly met an old colleague, and they grabbed a few drinks to catch up. At that moment, it was like a switch flipped in my mind. An absolute certainty. She was lying. And that's when the thought hit me. She's having an affair. That feeling was no longer a vague suspicion. It was sharp as a blade, clear and cold. No more maybe or probably, but she's hiding something. And then the thought appeared as if someone whispered it into my ear. Isabel is cheating. Not blind jealousy, not paranoia. This was instinct screaming the truth. My heart felt heavy, yet there was a strange clarity. No more vagueness, no more self-deception. I knew I had to face this. My first thought, check her phone. But reason pulled me back. Isabel never let her phone out of her sight. Even when sleeping, it was under her pillow. But I needed the truth. I couldn't live in doubt forever. I wanted to face reality, no matter how brutal it might be. And then, an idea struck me. Hire a private investigator. It sounded like something out of a cheap detective movie, but at that moment, it was the only path I could think of. I went on Google, searching mindlessly, eyes glued to the screen as if it were my last lifeline. A name popped up with hundreds of positive reviews. Richard Morley Investigations. I called immediately, setting up a meeting for the next morning. That entire night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of hiring someone to follow the woman who once meant the world to me made my stomach churn. The next morning, I walked into Richard's office. A small, simple, but tidy room. He, a middle-aged man with seasoned eyes, invited me to sit and said, "Tell me everything." I told him. Every detail. From the evasive glances, the late nights, to that smug smile when she thought she could have anyone. Richard listened carefully, without judgment, without interruption. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said, "I've seen this 100 times before. You're not crazy." We agreed to a 10-day surveillance on Isabel. Before I left, he warned me not to contact him until the 10 days were over unless it was an emergency. He asked me not to contact him during that time unless it was an emergency. "It's going to be tough," he said, "but let me do my job." Those 10 days were the longest of my life. I lived in torment, waiting for a verdict from fate. Isabel kept coming home late, still giving me hollow excuses. But this time, every lie felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I had sudden plans with some friends, or traffic was terrible today. She had no idea that every time she said those words, she made me believe even more that she was lying. Every time she came home late, I thought, all right, this time the investigator will surely catch her. But things kept going that way, giving him more opportunities to gather the evidence I needed. The truth would eventually come out. When Richard's call came on the morning of the 10th day, I knew everything was about to change. His voice was calm but firm. "I have what you need. Let's meet in person." "Of course." This was something I needed to hear face to face. I couldn't bear to receive such news over the phone. I had been enduring this endless torture, and I needed to see his expression to know for sure that what he was saying was the truth. I drove to his office with trembling hands, my heart pounding as if it would burst. On the desk, he placed a yellow envelope. He asked if I wanted him to explain or see for myself. I chose to hear it from him. I needed to brace myself before facing the truth. I said I wanted to hear it from him first. I thought that would soften the blow a little. In my head, I compared this feeling to catching your lover cheating, but having a few seconds to brace yourself before the punch to the gut. Mr. Morley took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto mine with uncompromising directness. "Your suspicions were correct." Just a simple sentence, but it hit me like a boulder crashing down on my chest. He recounted in detail, 3 separate times, Isabel had gone into the same apartment building, always alone, always leaving 2 hours later with the same man. He laid before me the apartment number, the man's name, Cody. That name echoed in my mind like an irritating refrain, even though I knew it was a placeholder in this story. At that moment, part of me wanted to charge out and confront Cody, to do things I knew were wrong. But as the heat simmered down, I realized Cody was just a symptom. The real disease was Isabel. Mr. Morley slid the yellow envelope toward me. Inside it lay undeniable evidence. Crisp black and white photos, her and Cody holding hands, embracing, kissing right next to her car. As I pulled out the photos, each one felt like a knife sinking deeper into my chest. Gut feelings were one thing, but seeing such brutal, undeniable truth was an entirely different sensation. I struggled not to break down right there in front of him. That collapse was inevitable, but I wanted to hold on to a shred of dignity, at least for now. The sense of loss wasn't just about losing a lover. It was the shattering of an entire future I had once believed in, meticulously built in my mind, with every tiny detail. I returned home, my head heavy, heart clenched. As I stepped through the door, I simply said to her, "We need to talk." My voice was so calm, it surprised even me. Isabel immediately sensed something was off. Her eyes scanned my face, searching for clues. I could see the confusion flickering in those eyes. I told her everything, about the private investigator, about Cody, about the visits to that apartment. I spoke slowly, each word reverberating in the suffocating air of the room. She sat there, silent, offering no denial, no apology, no attempt at explanation. Just a brazen, terrifying silence. The more I spoke, the angrier I became. Not because of what she had done, but because of her contemptible indifference now. When I told her I wanted to break up, she burst into laughter, a dry, cold laugh that echoed through the small room. "You think you'll find someone like me?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You should be grateful to be with me, even if I get bored and seek fun elsewhere. It's just physical. It means nothing." She continued her monologue, as if I should feel lucky to even exist in the orbit of her self-centered universe. She said a lot of things along those lines, basically trying to make me feel like I should be grateful just to be with her, even if she cheated. Can you believe that? I was speechless. I knew she was arrogant. I knew she thought she was special. But this was on a whole other level. It seemed like her ideal scenario was that I would simply accept that she was too good for me, that she could do whatever she wanted, and I should feel lucky to follow her around. Her words hit my pride like vicious punches, but instead of bringing me down, they ignited a pure, unfiltered rage within me. She genuinely believed I wouldn't have the courage to walk away. That was the extent of her self-confidence. I had felt hurt and angry before, but this was different. This was pure rage. I had never felt anything like it. I stood up, looked her straight in the eye, and unleashed every ounce of contempt I had for her. No shouting, no cursing, just words sharp as blades. Then I walked out. I didn't take my bag, didn't say goodbye. I simply opened the door and left. I couldn't stand being in the same room with her for another second. I felt utterly betrayed. It was over. After that, I had to spend the night at a cheap motel. I couldn't go back to that house, at least not yet. I just needed to be alone and reflect on everything that had happened. I lay there, on a stiff bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation in my head over and over again. I couldn't believe the way she had reacted. It was unbelievable. The next morning, I returned home to collect my belongings. Isabel was still there, trying to keep a cold facade, but her eyes were puffy and red. As I entered, she said, "I knew you'd come back," with a smug smirk. I didn't respond. I quietly gathered my things, not bothering to look at her even once. I knew I couldn't take everything in one trip, but all I wanted at that moment was to leave that place as soon as possible. I said, "I'll come back for the rest later." She just stood there, staring at me, her face full of disbelief, as if she couldn't accept that I was really leaving. She stayed silent until I reached the door. I heard her mutter something, but by then I no longer cared. I tried to understand why she behaved the way she did. But to this day, I still don't get it. Perhaps Isabel was seeking validation she believed she deserved, but didn't receive from me. Maybe the walls of pride and the glow of her self-created spotlight had turned into a cage, suffocating her in a relationship she deemed too safe, too quiet. I won't deny I had been the steady man, the kind who listened, who compromised, but perhaps in Isabel's eyes, that steadiness turned into dullness. She wanted more. She craved emotional jolts, the adrenaline of surprises. Maybe she saw me as a temporary harbor, a safe bet, while still chasing experiences that made her feel young, desirable, and powerful. And perhaps, in her inner world, cheating wasn't betrayal. It was merely a way to affirm her own worth, a twisted justification she crafted to avoid guilt. But in the end, all of that was me trying to rationalize something that, by its very nature, defied reason. Aftermath. When I decisively left that apartment, I thought it was over. But Isabel didn't think so. She began messaging me, The initial messages were dripping with sarcasm, brimming with arrogance. She mocked my decision as if this was just a tantrum, believing I would inevitably crawl back, because a guy like me had nowhere else to go. But when I returned to the apartment again, this time with a friend to collect the rest of my belongings, Isabel's eyes had changed. She no longer hid her confusion. The way she watched me, frozen as I opened the closet, taking out each shirt, each personal item, that was the moment she realized. This time, I was truly not coming back. The last message she sent me read, "You'll never find anyone like me again." A warning, or rather, a venomous curse. I blocked her immediately after. Not because I feared her words, but because I refused to let that toxicity seep into my mind for even another second. Scene transition. The breakup with Isabel was a deep wound, and it took a long time before I could touch it without flinching. But life goes on, whether I want it to or not. A few months later, I received an invitation to my 15-year high school reunion. Initially, I planned to decline. The idea of pretending to be fine in front of others exhausted me. But my old friends didn't give up. They texted, called, even joked, telling me to forget the heartbreak and get a life. Eventually, I agreed. That night, the reunion's atmosphere far exceeded my expectations. It was a strange feeling, seeing faces once so familiar, now each carrying their own stories. And then, she appeared. Not Isabel, Sophia. Sophia was the girl everyone knew, not because of drama or gossip, but because she radiated a unique energy, a beauty that was regal yet approachable. After graduation, she became a model, and quite a successful one too. I had seen her in a few magazines and online ads. If you're into fashion, you might have heard of her. We had shared a few classes, but our relationship was purely casual. I never thought I would be on her radar. But life has its ways of mocking assumptions. I hadn't spoken to her in at least 7 years, maybe even longer. I noticed Sophia wasn't there that night, but her best friend was. They were still very close, which impressed me. It showed that despite her success, Veronica hadn't changed much. I approached her friend to say hello and chat a little. Throughout the conversation, she had a bright smile on her face. Sophia, her smile turned unusually bright. "She's going to kill me for saying this," her friend said playfully. "But she always had a soft spot for you back in high school." I chuckled, not out of disbelief, but because skepticism had become a reflex. Sophia, a successful model, had a crush on me? It sounded ridiculous. Even back in high school, we weren't part of the same crowd. We were friendly, but that was it, nothing more. No way that was true. And now that she was a model, even less likely. Yet that sentence lingered with me all evening. When the reunion night ended, I drove home in complete silence. The road felt longer than usual. I didn't play music, didn't turn on the radio, just let the quietness wrap around me. But in my head, Sophia's friend's words kept echoing endlessly. "She always had a soft spot for you back in high school." Such a simple sentence, yet it pierced through the layers of doubt I had built up all this time. After everything that had happened with Isabel, I didn't even dare believe someone could truly see my worth. But this was Sophia, a woman I once thought existed only in the world of the out of reach. She was beautiful, successful, living a life bathed in the spotlight. And me? I was just an ordinary man, freshly escaped from a broken relationship, carrying scars that hadn't even begun to heal. Taking a chance after reconnecting, the next morning, I sat in front of my phone, scrolling through Veronica's Instagram profile. Her photos were filled with style, from fashion shoots in Milan to simple everyday moments with her little dog. There was a strange contradiction between her online image and the girl I once knew. I wondered if, after all her success, she still held on to a fragment of the girl she used to be. Or maybe I was the one desperately clinging to a faded memory. Even so, I tapped on the message button. It was an act of hesitation, but also a small effort to step out of the shadows of hurt. I typed, "Hey Sophia, hope you still remember me. Last night's reunion was fun. It would have been even better if you were there." Then I hit send, and I waited. The following days were an internal tug of war. I tried to keep busy, buried myself in work, exercised, read books, but in my mind, I was constantly hoping for a message notification. On the fifth day, when I had almost given up hope, my phone buzzed. Sophia had replied, "Oh my God, Keith, what a sweet surprise. Of course I remember you. Sorry I couldn't make it. Work in Paris swept me away. How have you been?" That message was like a small beam of light piercing through my darkened state. It wasn't just a greeting. It was an open door, a new possibility. We began talking more, from polite questions to deeper topics. Gradually, the 10-year gap was bridged by laughter and mundane everyday stories. She talked about her work, about the hectic days on the catwalk, but didn't shy away from mentioning the loneliness of constant travel, of never having a place that truly felt like home. I realized that behind the glamorous facade, Veronica was still the girl who used to sit at the back of the class, doodling in her notebook, smiling when I pulled silly antics during math lessons. When she suggested switching to FaceTime instead of texting, I knew our connection had moved beyond mere politeness. That first call lasted nearly 2 hours. We talked about everything, from high school memories to worries about the future. I laughed more than I had in the entire past year. She told me all about the industry, the trips, the photo shoots, and the ups and downs of the job. At that time, she was in Brussels working on an ad campaign, and she even sent me some behind-the-scenes photos. It was fascinating to see her in her element, and it really helped us connect on a deeper level despite being thousands of miles apart. And I realized, some wounds can only be healed by the gentleness of people you least expect. After a few weeks of talking almost daily, it felt like we were dating. We had never officially labeled it, but clearly it was more than just friendship. So I decided to be a little cheesy and asked her directly, "What are we really?" She giggled and said we were really great friends, but she wanted more than that. I found that adorable, so I went ahead and asked if she'd like to be my girlfriend. She immediately said yes, without hesitation. It was an amazing feeling, the challenge of long-distance love. Of course, being in a long-distance relationship is a huge challenge. She's a model, always traveling the world, while I have a regular job here. I had a long-distance relationship when I was younger, and I hated it. It was hard to stay connected, to feel like you were really part of each other's lives. But this time was different. This was Veronica, and she had become so important to me that I was willing to do whatever it took to make it work. The decision to book a flight to Brussels wasn't impulsive. It was the culmination of sleepless nights, of late-night calls, of spontaneous smiles whenever Veronica's name popped up on my screen. I had thought about it for a long time. After what happened with Isabel, the hardened part of me kept growling, "Don't let yourself be vulnerable again." But even that part had to quietly admit, opening up isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the only remaining form of courage. That was the first time in months my heart felt lighter. Just a simple sentence, yet it was enough to assure me I wasn't walking into this journey alone. The flight to Brussels felt longer than I had imagined. Not because of the hours, but because of the relentless swirl of thoughts. I remember staring out the plane window for what seemed like forever, watching clouds drift by, feeling as if I were drifting with them, both heavy and weightless. As I set foot at the airport, a cool breeze hit my face. Brussels welcomed me with a quietness unlike the bustling cities I'd known. But that tranquility didn't make me feel lonely. Sophia greeted me in the main hall. She was wearing a beige coat, a shawl lightly wrapped around her neck. Simple, yet strangely elegant. When our eyes met, all the noise in my head suddenly stopped. She smiled. A real smile, not the poised ones I had seen on magazine covers. It was warm, gentle, and somehow made me feel like I was coming home, even though I had never belonged here. She invited me to one of her photo shoots, the first time I saw Veronica in her professional element. I stood aside, watching her move, interact with the crew, not with the eyes of a fan, but with the gaze of a genuinely proud friend. The Instagram incident. Ironically, just when everything seemed to be at its peak of happiness, the past still found a way to drag me back to reality. I was in Florence with Sophia, a woman I never dared to dream would enter my life in such a way. That trip was almost perfect. She had a photo shoot for an Italian fashion brand, and I, the outsider, got to accompany her as a silent companion. I took behind-the-scenes shots of her, witnessing her shine in her element. In a moment of impulse, I decided to share a few photos on Instagram. Not publicly, just a story for close friends. A seemingly harmless action. But I had forgotten one small detail that would bring back an old nightmare. Lydia, my ex, was still on that list. I had blocked her on every platform, from Facebook, WhatsApp, even email. But Instagram, an app I rarely used, was the one loophole left. A foolish mistake. Just hours after posting the story, a message from Lydia appeared, a short, cold line dripping with sarcasm. "Who's that? You a paid fanboy photographer now?" Accompanied by a mocking laugh emoji. I stared at the screen, not with a racing heart from emotion, but with the tired frustration of an all too familiar nuisance. I simply replied, "That's my girlfriend." Not a word more. For the next 10 minutes, the typing indicator popped up and vanished, as if she were battling herself, unsure whether to strike back or retreat in silence. Finally, Isabel sent a single line. "Well, goodbye for the last time." It should have ended there, but I felt the need to close that door once and for all. I replied, "You used to think you were out of my league, right? Believe me, Sophia's on an entirely different level. Oh, and how's that guy you left me for doing these days?" She read the message but didn't reply. I didn't need another word from her. I blocked Isabel immediately. I knew that might have been petty, but some wounds needed stitching up, even if with a bitter thread. I had let her hurt me long enough. Still, I have to admit, I was curious about her reaction. I'm being honest about that. Happily ever after. After all, what relieved me the most wasn't getting back at Lydia, but realizing I had truly stepped out of the past's shadow. Florence was breathtaking that day. But even more beautiful was the moment I realized I was no longer chained by old wounds. Sophia, with all her kindness, intelligence, and grace, was living proof that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected turns. I once thought happiness was pure luck, but this time I knew I had chosen right. Yes, we still faced the challenges of a long-distance relationship. Yes, there were prying eyes and whispered gossip, but between us stood an understanding, a trust I once thought I'd never regain. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid to think about it. I knew that no matter what happens, I was strong enough to stand my ground. So, that's it. So that's my story of betrayal, old scars, and finding love in the most unexpected place. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, perhaps you've been through something similar, and I hope you know you deserve better too.